Hi there, everybody. Welcome once again to reading Carl Schmitt's Dictatorship. Today we're finishing the third part of chapter 5, which deals again with the custom of people's commissars during the French Revolution. This is basically pages 142 to 147, third and final part of the fifth chapter. So we'll continue where we exactly left off on page 142, the break of it. The detail of this dictatorship, that is the dictatorship of the commissars and the National Convention, right? Remember that the revolutionary commissioners sent out on behalf of the National Commission were commissars of action in that sense. They were commissarial dictators in that sense, whereas the sovereign dictator was the National Convention, right? This is his distinction so far. So the details of this dictatorship are of as of little legal interest as the causes in which the representatives of the people posed as strategists in the army. In other words, it's the details of this is as of little interest as cases of law, as which representatives of the thing posed as generals in the army, as strategists in the army. The result was just not the elimination of all internal political obstacles, but also the creation of an apparatus of government dominated by the center, one in which no intermediate form of authority could halt the imposition emanating from the center. So therefore, in other words, the system created by the dictatorship of this whole structure that he's described so far. In other words, the creation of the commissions and the centralization after once during the Committee of Public Safety that controlled. In other words, the National Convention promoted this in two parts. The first part, before the Committee of Public Safety and after. Because before, these agents had so much discretion, and there was indifferentiation of the discretion based upon this. But once the committee was established, these were under the control of the committee, and the committee policed them and micromanaged them, centralizing authority. And therefore, what happened is, therefore, as it centralized, it also expanded the power of the local commissioners. But what happened here is that the structure is these were the agents that these people emanated from this. The committee was a member of that. So therefore, the structure, as you said earlier, that the committee controlled the convention, and one member of the committee controlled the committee, who then controlled the committee, then controlled the convention, who then the convention then had control over the convention. The convention authorized this, but the committee controlled and policed and managed the commissioners, people's commissioners. And this creates, like he says, this eliminates all this whole structure eliminates all internal political obstacles. And the center dominates everything, and no intermediate power interferes with it, as he says clearly. And as mentioned above, the unlimited power of the representative exercise externally correlated with proportional dependence on the impersonal political center. In other words, the political center of the power was at the National Convention in that sense, right? And particularly the committee, right? And it was made absolutely clear that the representatives had no more than a imperative mandate. Imperative mandate, and that he was urged to comply with all the instructions emanating from the Committee of Public Safety. Okay. When a compliance, when a compliant administrative apparatus was created, right? The representative himself appeared to be something of an obstacle rather than a useful person. So once you had a situation of complete administrative of this, then the representative became a obstacle, right? Another obstacle rather than a useful person. A certain regularity was necessary, along with a limited jurisdiction, not so much for legal protection as for the benefit of a regulated action, which now could which could now adapt the general character again. Once the political opponent had been eliminated and external relations had become predictable and normal. So then in other words, once the situation became stabilized, right? Once the situation was that, there were two things happened. The political opponents had been eliminated and external relations became predictable and normal. Then there was no longer need to have the discretionary authority or this aspect of this, and therefore in this normalized process, this new the structure nevertheless created a more centralized. It didn't need the people's representative anymore, and therefore the compliant administrative apparatus simply just complied with it, right? Furthermore, all too often the representative acted with too much autonomy because he saw himself as a colleague of the person who led the center, and also was just like them, a representative of the people. So therefore, this is, in other words, okay. The problem here is that instead of simply just converting this power to the center, right? In other words, these administrative entities doing this. Now, this person here controlling these people thought he was the equal of the center, was a representative. In other words, and equally like them, a representative of the people. Whereas in the Middle Ages, new hereditary functions were created for the most part out of commissions of reformation, right? New hereditary functions out of commission. Here, an abstract apparatus of government and administration emerged in the form of the state over the subject, which was also called a state, of its organizing and administrative activity. So therefore, in other words, so in the Middle Ages, what was called from the Reformation, commissions of Reformation, hereditary functions emerged, right? And in order to do this, and then all of a sudden, a hereditary functionary emerged, right? With authorization from the king, so a jurisdiction and things like that. But in this revolutionary moment, right, here the abstract apparatus of government and administration emerged in the form of a state over the subject, which was also called, the subject was the state. So therefore, this state, the organization, bureaucratic administrations, and the apparatus of government and administration emerged in the form of state over, which was over the subject, which was also called the state. So on the state of its organizing and administrative activity, right? The subject of its over the subject of its organizing and administrative activity. So a state that overcame, not a state within a state, but a state was in the form of a state over the subject of its organizing and administrative. And further reasons combined to prevent the development of Republican commissar into an established official. In other words, a certain Republican sense of duty beyond the control of the Committee of Public Safety and of local party organizations, local reasons that allowed for better surveillance and therefore dependence than in the Middle Ages, so on. In other words, okay, the centralization of authority. In other words, they didn't want to create this the development of a Republican commissar. Combined prevent this. Now he says, what is 40? What note 40 points to? Talon of Deschamps' report of 15th May 1793 states, okay, this is what it states. So it says, I was not at all at Sharon when the General Commission gave an address to me to stay close to this ministry. I found out about this. I strongly disapproved. I told the ministry that it was dangerous in a republic to accord so much importance to an individual. In other words, this is um, uh, again, this is the report of the convention in that sense. So that, in other words, it was not a good idea to put a person there. The idea that a person there was that too much personal power, and they didn't want that. They wanted to fight that in that sense. Then in the Middle Ages, so on. In consequence, the commissar of the National Convention created through his action a uniform administrative bureaucracy, which became a sort of contradictory political became a, in other words, the consequence, the Commissar of the National Convention created through his action a uniform administrative bureaucracy, which became a source of contradictory political directives and remained in place even after the creator himself, the Commissar, became obsolete and had to step down. So therefore, in other words, the Commissars created a bureaucracy, and that this bureaucracy often created, as he said, created contradictory political directives. Even when the creator itself, the Commissar, became an obstacle, he had to step down. In other words, and therefore this. On the 14th Fimeur the 4th December 1793, the revolutionary government gave itself a provisional constitution whose axiom was the National Convention is the unique pulsing center of the government. All agencies and civil servants were subjected to the control of the Committee of Public Safety and the Committee of General Security. If it was a matter of surveilling a suspicious person, in the internal police, gendarmerie, right? In other words, so if it was this, in other words, if it was control of the Committee of Public Safety and of the Committee of General, if it was a matter of surveilling suspicious people. So if the surveilling suspicious people in internal police, this goes to the Committee of General Security. But the direct control is public safety, right? It was explicitly said in the provisional constitution that surveillance was part of the execution of the laws. The execution of the laws is divided into surveillance and application. Article 2, Section 3. The duties of surveillance, which had so far been fulfilled by the Commissars of National Convention, were now transferred to national agents who were appointed and monitored by the committees. Section 2, Article 14. Most representatives were already recalled on May 1794. On 1st April 1794, Carnot had declared that in the convention that the problem with the representatives was that they were concerned with minutiae, and that on their arrival, the official bodies, as if paralyzed, left everything to them. In other words, left everything to them in that sense. Although this effect was welcome as long as the existing bodies were politically unreliable, now it was in the new government's interest to have these bodies run their business in an orderly fashion. Here, too, the bureaucracy was stabilized through sovereignty. In other words, it was stabilized through sovereign control of the center. Right? The Commissars of Action was replaced by a Commissar of Control as a regular Commissar of Service. So therefore, in other words, the original Commissars of Action was placed by a Commissar of Control as a regular Commissar of Service. And the provisional, remember back he said about Commissars of Service, doing some service, doing some function. Right? The provisional constitution of 1402 was keen to create a well-defined responsibilities in the interest of a clear and unified administration. But of course, only insofar as the leadership remained unconditionally in the hands of the Committee of Public Safety. Although through this constitution, the election of local and provincial bodies was eliminated, together with the other vestiges of self-government that still existed on the basis of the Constitution of 1791. The Committee of Public Safety appointed members of the local revolutionary committees, the Committee of Revolutions, who were given policing powers, as well as the aforementioned national agents, right? These new national agents. With that, a certain consolidation was achieved. This centralization remained in existence even after the downfall of Robespierre and the dissolution of the Committee of Public Safety. Right? So, in other words, what happens here? Centralization. Schmitt is pointing out how this moment a centralizationizing authority happened. That therefore that there was no more link. Didn't need to have the committee. No longer needed these individual agents. They were just transformed from commissars of action to commissars of service and functionaries who were no longer having any authority over these things. And therefore, these agents now sent all authority centralized, both in terms of the revolutionary committees, local revolutionary committees. Again, they destroyed all localizing local governments. Now, anyone who's appointed was appointed by these revolutionary committees were appointed by the committee, no longer appointed by the revolutionary commissar, now can be appointed directly by the Committee of Public Safety. Again, they bypassed what was originally controlled as a mediating entity controlling. Now these revolutionary commissars, these commissars of the people, now get souped up and transformed, and that the thing that they used to have control over now appoint to report the committees of public safety, report to the committee. In other words, the revolutionary committee, sorry, the revolutionary committees you talked about here, report directly to the Committee of Public Safety, as does the national agents report to the convention, right? But they report against the committee in that sense. So the Committee of Public Safety appointed members of local committee revenue who were given police powers as well as the aforementioned national agents. With that, a certain consolidation, even after the committee fell, he says, right? A proposal of 14 Viennese, or 4th March 1795, to get back to electing the local and political authorities with the help of the population was ignored. So they were going to return power to the local things. This was a decision electing the local things was ignored. In the new organization of the year 1795, the commissars of the Directorate, that is of the center government, who could be recalled any time, were retained. Therefore, these commissars of this would be of the general government. They were sent to individual administrative bodies, provinces and local unions, with the task of monitoring the execution of the laws, and if need be, of forcing it in a way of request. Therefore, they're to monitor, but if need be, enforcing it as if there was requested to help enforce it. Here again, the centralization prevailed, and the opposition pointing out that the commissars were nothing but the old intendants, and subaltern tyranny hardly changed anything. In other words, the opponent's saying, "Oh my God, this is just the new attendants. You just returned us to the intendants." The sphere of, but a centralized one in that sense, far more centralized than the intendants were in that sense, and controlled. The sphere of authority of these commissars was inordinately wide. The body in which the commissars were active was only permitted to pass resolutions in the present and with the consent of law of 21st Fumador 3, with his consent. In other words, that the bodies of which the commission was active was only permitted to pass resolutions in the presence and with his consent, with his presence and his consent of this commissar, these officials. So if they're going to do something, they can only do in his presence and with his consent. So therefore, nothing changed. The body in which the commissar was active, the body, the administrative entity, could pass resolutions only if he's present and with his consent. The commissar of the province corresponded with the Minister of Interior and sought to obtain his decision in all relative matters. So the commissar of the province the commissar of the province responded to the Ministry of Interior and needed to obtain his decisions on all important matters. So he had, in other words, his limited jurisdiction. In fact, the commissar had to be appointed from among the inhabitants of the district. After all, a concession to the idea of self-government. So the commissar had to come from the district, but he was appointed by the Minister of Interior, or in a sense, right? This came to an end under Napoleonic administration. Law 28, Volume 8, 17 February 1800. The sole chief of the department was the prefect, was the prefect, and the district arrondissement, the district and the district sub-prefect was his subordinate. So the head of a department and the districts were underneath the departments, was his sub-prefect. So a prefect, the chief of the department was a prefect, and then under him were sub-prefects of the districts. This deliberately and in the interest of unconditional centralization, no locals were appointed. No locals were appointed as prefects or sous-prefects, the sub-prefects, from then on. So therefore, originally they were localized under the before the pre-Napoleonic moment. Under that moment, they were local. They were allowed to come. They will come from them. They would be appointed from the interior, but they would be that. Now, what happened was, okay, this idea of organization from the departments, and then this inside the departments, that prefix and sub-prefix. These were no longer going to be appointed from local people, but appointed from the outside. Conditional consider no locals were appointed as prefects, sub-prefects. This was how the ideal bureaucracy was created. And through the Commissioner of Revolution of the National Convention, a commissar who was externally omnipotent, but internally dependent and unconditionally so. So therefore, this National Convention was the commissar of the revolution. In other words, and through the commissar of the revolution of the National Convention, a commissar who was externally omnipotent but internally dependent upon the convention, right, and unconditionally so, right. The intendant of the ancient regime, still relative autonomous, became the prefect of the modern administration. So the old intendant of the ancient regime, still relatively autonomous, right, became, in other words, the old intendant of the ancient regime was relatively autonomous. So that's, from that sense, is that now that this became the prefect of the modern administration, who was integrated into a bureaucratic system. Now the machine of government was easy to lead from the center. Through the coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire, Napoleon became the leader of this apparatus, which, under normal conditions, operated on well-defined responsibilities. So, in other words, then what happened was that once the revolutionary body said this, after even after Robespierre, right, it maintained it, and then when Napoleon came into the coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire, what happened was, it stayed the same in that sense. It was still kind of a very organized machine, right? In extraordinary cases, on the other hand, the threatened sovereignty dispatched commissars who intervened directly. At different points of the system of the responsibilities, in 1814, when the war against Napoleon entered French territory, the emperor sent reliable senior officials, senators for the most part, as extraordinary imperial commissars. He sent them to various divisions and to the provinces, mainly to control and accelerate the new mass recruitment, which it was normally the prefects has to organize now. In addition to that, the commissar had to ensure the collection of extraordinary taxes and requisitions and whatever army needed, to monitor all the measures of defense, and to supervise organizing volunteers. Therefore, this is during Napoleon, right? That all of a sudden, when the crisis of Napoleon, when it was the armies in 1814, when the enemies of Napoleon the war against Napoleon came into France, then he created these imperial commissioners who had to go to certain regions and to micromanage them in that sense. If necessary, they also had to intervene personally with appropriate measures. In other words, if necessary, they also had to intervene personally. The practice of the commissar upon arrival was to summon all military and civilian officials and to have them report on the conditions of the provinces, the status quo of conscription activities, and the extraordinary taxes. And he encouraged authorities and the people to be keenly involved. He issued proclamations, influenced the authorities through suggestions and appeals, and in urgent cases gave orders himself. For example, he called upon the field wardens for defense or requested the army of citizens when the enemy was approaching, the destruction of bridges and byways useful to the enemy, the removal of cattle, and so on. Okay. In April 1814, when the emperor was defeated and the Bourbons reestablished their legitimate possession, it was once again extraordinary commissioners who transformed the administrative apparatus handed over to the new sovereign. 22nd April 1814 saw the promulgation by the decree of the King's Steward, the Lieutenant General of the kingdom, by which an extraordinary commissar of the king, Commissars extraordinary, was sent to every district of every division. His duty was as follows: dissemination of the news that the king had recovered legitimate possession, enforcement of all the provisional measures of the new government, supply of information on anything doing with public order, and finally, in conformity with general commissarial formula, to take all measures needed to ease the establishment of new government and its activities according to the circumstances. And here, in other words, and those were the those, in other words, the duties with this, right? And here are his rights: to appeal to all civilian and military bodies, if necessary, to give orders that all of the authorities in civil service should carry out, to dismiss and reappoint in office, provisionally, in the case of this sort, that he should report immediately to the commissar appointed by the Ministry of Domestic Affairs, who then made a definite decision. Okay. So therefore, he should provisionally dismiss and reappoint in office provisionally, but in cases of this sort, he had to report to the commissar appointed by the Ministry of Domestic Affairs, who then made the decision to release all the persons who had been arrested as political enemies on the basis of the imperial decrees, to invalidate extraordinary measures taken in the war by the former government, like the deployment of military presence, to make requisitions to destroy byways, and so on. These royal commissioners correspond with the Commissars d'Interior, in other words, Commissars of Interior Affairs, of the Interior, the Commissaria d'Interior, the Commissar of Internal Affairs of the Interior, and with other commissars appointed by to the different ministries. 1 year later, between March and June 15th, when Napoleon was back in Paris again, the administrative apparatus itself once more found itself once more in the emperor's service. An imperial decree of 20 April 1814, okay, this is just a bureaucratic note, sent imperial commission extraordinaries to the districts of the division, and it did so after the prefects had already been appointed. The duties and authorizations of these commissars related to the new appointments in offices or civil agencies. So therefore, the duties and administrations of these commissars were related to new appointments in the offices. And when the new commissars arrived, the functions of all the mayors, all the members in the local and provisional bodies, all the officers in command of the National Guard, all sub-prefects were annulled. The commissars immediately appointed new officials in their place, following the prefect's suggestion, and he took an oath of allegiance from the newly appointed. He took an oath of allegiance to the emperor in that sense. All the ladders were immediately reported to the ministries of domestic affairs. All the people he's removed, right, of these things, in other words, the functions of other mayors, all the local administration, all the officers and commanders of the guards, all the sub-prefects, these were annulled. And the commissar immediately appointed new people in their place, who then took the oath, and then all of the latter, all the people that removed, reported to the Ministry of Domestic Affairs. After the emperor was defeated for a second time, the commissars of the new government appeared once more. The king himself, as well as the authorized princes of the royal court and ministers, dispatched the commissars to the provinces in order to impose regulations recognition of legitimate authority, and to cut and to cut on the factions. Okay, that's the translation. To suppress factions, cut the factions, suppress. To have a legitimate authority recognized and to curtail, not cut, Jesus, suppress, curtail, compare the factions, constrain, suppress the factions, or to cut on the factions, suppress the factions. In translation, oh God. This time the transformation happened quickly. Some new prefects were appointed, but in most cases the officials and officers were dismissed from their function by Napoleon. In other words, some new prefects were appointed, but in most cases the officials and officers who were dismissed from their functions by Napoleon returned to their old positions and resumed their functions. By the Royal Ordinance of 19 July 1815, the extraordinary commissioners were recalled because in the future their service would be superfluous and even detrimental to unity of action, which is the first requirement of regular administration. Therefore, even after the King restoration, there was not a restoration. They kept the centralized unity of action, which is needed for regular administration, which is unity of administration, which is, okay, again, this is a better translation of the French. If you're translating this for the French, this is very frustration. A unit of action, which is the first need of a regular administration. And this is where the chapter ends. Here ends. He shows how this. In other words, he shows the evolution and the origin. And this way, Schmitt is a construct. He's kind of showing us the design of construction of the state and the European state, the centralized European state through the French Revolution. The French Revolution is the model of the state. This is the actual origin and the way it was. In other words, this model of revolutionary centralization is the basis by which the modern state emerges in the continent. And I think this is maybe how where political theory should distinguish itself of this. This is why I think he's showing us this. This is how the sovereign dictatorship of this entity forms the new state. This is the new state. The Revolutionary Committee, the Committee of the National Convention, that sovereign dictatorship creates the Napoleonic become the state, which Napoleon operationalizes and tweaks a little bit by the creation of the departments and sub-departments and and more administrative regularization. The king, and then it goes back and forth, only maintains what the convention and Napoleon did. So it doesn't undo it. And even that, the point was that the king doesn't, his royal commissioners, the royal extraordinary commissioners don't remain once they've normalized everything. They are superfluous and they are removed. So therefore, that's a very important thing. Now we look at next chapter 6, which will focus on the state of siege. Right, this is that famous. On the state of siege, right? This is what is the next line? It will be the dictatorship and contemporary law and order and the state of siege, right? So therefore, we will look at it and pay attention to that in light of what we will read. So if you have any questions, issues, or things that you don't understand, wish to further explain, further develop, please put them there and I will respond to them when I see them. Or maybe even if they're big enough, I might make a separate video for you, for people for that and that thing. What I need to do is now at this point is if you've liked it, like the like button, hit the like buttons, share it within your social media, share it with your friends, forward it to a friend, the link. If you didn't like it, of course, you could always thumb down it, but you could say why in the comments. what is the reason and what's the problem or what did I do wrong or something. If you have not subscribed, subscribe, please, to help the channel grow. Grow. It's more important to grow. Another thing you can do is if you want to follow me on social media, my links to social media are down below. If you want to find more about me as an academic scholar, what I do, my research and things like that, you can follow me below. The academic social media links are also then listed below that. And then if you want to help me do what I do, man, and you want to help to contribute to do what I do, and we're not monetized yet. If this ever becomes monetized, there'll be a please give button. Okay, so it'd be nice, but if you want to help do what I do, okay, great, please, it would be useful, and I will appreciate it greatly. But then again, you do so by becoming a member of Subscribe Star and Patreon. The links are below. Another way you can help is to buy one of my books. The books are listed below, my published books. If you order this Lulu one, the other ones the publishers and bookstores will get it. It's a normal one. I won't get that much from them. Actually, the university one I haven't got money at all from. It's a little annoying. But if you want to continue in order and buy the Lulu book, my notebook on Aristotle politics, please do so, and that way you can help me as well, because I'll get the money that the booksellers get, and it must be pretty good, pretty decent. Not too great, but it's a fair amount. And if you can help, it'd be wonderful. That's it. Just to notice that Fridays are usually these we post wrapping up the series, and I'm not doing anything else other than this. So when you get to on Fridays, Monday through Thursdays will be normally one of these sessions. This session's sorry for the change, but then what happens on Friday will always be kind of either a live stream, a messing around, or maybe a book review, book chat thing. Okay, dokie. Well, that's it. Take care. Have a good day. See you later. See you next time when we look at begin chapter 6.